We have Monday reports, so I follow up with all the studies, making sure documents are in the approved state. Right? We look at documents that are in progress or QC rejected, open quality issues, because I learned very early on, right? You have to be proactive. You do not want to end the study and you have, hundreds or thousands of rejected documents. There's just no way to make sure, right, to get those corrections in a timely fashion. So lots of proactive tasks. Yeah, those Monday reports are huge for us, both internally and externally following up. I also do TMF monthly health summaries. So the beginning of the month, looking at different trends, making sure we're capturing, right, okay, what issues are, the top QIs this month, right? Is it metadata? Is there a certain form that's, having issues? Right now, we're at the end of Q2, so we have our TMF quarterly health meetings, which I love to do, actually. It's just so crazy what you can find from metrics, right? You're like, it's so eye-opening. And there's, the easy ones like, how many documents uploaded per month versus, right, your quality issues, pre-approval, post-approval, and document deletion. So the list goes on and on.
Hey TMF Elite, welcome back to another episode where we'll be examining the vital roles that keep the TMF running smoothly. Today we're shining the spotlight on the Associate Director of TMF with Annette Bungo. In this episode, we'll be learning about what the daily grind looks like for an Associate Director of TMF, the career path that leads to this powerhouse role, the key skills and attributes that make someone successful in this position. So if you're curious about climbing that TMF ladder or you just want to know what it takes, stick around. Annette, welcome to the TMF Daily Podcast.
Thank you so much, Nicole. Thank you for having me. I'm so excited to be here.
Thanks for joining us. So your journey to this role has been fascinating. Can you just share with us some of the pivotal moments and experiences that shaped your career path to becoming an Associate Director of TMF?
Of course. Yeah. So actually, my career trajectory was very nonlinear. So I started in a completely different field. So I used to work in biotechnology. And then I actually was like, I don't think this is for me. And then I decided to go back to my childhood dream of going to veterinary school. So I actually ended up in veterinary school. I finished my first year, and before my second year, I had that gut feeling, this isn't for me anymore. I'm not so sure. And so I listened to my gut. I withdrew from veterinary school. And so I was unemployed. I had no idea what I was going to do with my life. I was so, scared, confused. I was like, oh my gosh, what did I just do? And so I started job hunting, and I kind of saw these roles, CRA, Clinical Research Associate, CRC, Clinical Research Coordinator. And I was like, I think I want to be in this field. And it was kind of all of these things that I was looking for. But come to find out, it's really hard to just become a CRA. And so I began working with a recruiter, and he found this role called Clinical Records Technician. And I was like, it sounds interesting, right? He's like, this could be a good foot in the door. And so it was a contract role at the time. And I did the interview. They gave me 48 hours to say yes. So it was like interview on Wednesday, by Friday, right? Like accept or we'll move on to the next candidate. So I was like, all right, like I'll take it, let's see where this goes. And that basically changed my whole entire life, was that job opportunity. So it kind of snowballed after that. I was the clinical records technician for about 6 months or so, and I learned all the foundation, right, of QCing. We had the paper documents, so I had to go into the room. We had the little library with the rolling bookshelves, and Viva and TMF and Wingspan and all of these systems were kind of just getting started, which was really interesting to see the transition to electronic. But after that role, I transitioned to a clinical trial assistant and then kind of worked my way up to that CRA role. But during that whole time, I really had a hand in the TMF activities. So constantly reconciling, reviewing, chasing other departments for documents. I was pulled into a lot of migration projects when companies were going through mergers. And so I just really continued to love that field, right, of the TMF. And so at my current company, they had a need to bring, an eTMF system in-house. And I was like, gosh, this could be the perfect opportunity, right? I kind of just want to focus on the TMF. This is my love. This is my joy. And so I applied. And at the time, it was a TMF manager position. So I was able to implement the TMF system, curate all the SOPs, right? Really just kind of author and help get all of these processes together to launch to the study teams, both internally and externally. And I think really the pivotal point for becoming the associate director was growing out a team. So being able to have my first direct report, which was so helpful, helping with those daily operations. I got to focus more on maybe some oversight as well as kind of just refining the processes and making them better for all the teams. It's been quite a journey. It's been really exciting. I love where I am right now. I love what I do. And it's just been, a great journey so far.
So you just unpacked a lot right there.
Yeah, it's been a long journey.
So your first real job after you got out of college was a clinical records technician.
Mm-hmm.
That's a new title. I haven't heard of that one before.
Yeah.
So was that at the site level or CRO sponsor?
Good question. Yeah. So I immediately went to the sponsor side and stayed throughout the sponsor this entire time.
And then you only had 48 hours to decide if you wanted that job.
Yes.
It was like, take it or leave it.
Yeah. I had withdrawn from vet school and I knew, right, I wanted to get into this field. I was like, I think this aligns with the industry that I want to be in, right? And I have so much to learn. It's completely new. So I took a chance and it ended up just working out perfectly, better than I could have ever imagined. So yeah, it's been awesome.
So how many years were you in the TMF space before you became a manager?
So I was only the clinical records technician for 6 months. And then when I transitioned to true clinical operations CTA role, I believe was 2018. And then up until 2022. So I think that's about 4 years or so in the ClinOps space with a helping hand in the TMF, and 2022 was fully dedicated to the TMF space.
Did you have a mentor pushing you in that direction? How did that just work out? Or the stars were just aligning and that's how it worked?
When I joined as a clinical records technician, I had a really good boss. And I looked up to him a lot. And I was like, I want to be you one day. This is what I want to be. And so I worked really closely with him in terms of different projects and getting that good foundation. And as I moved into clinical operations and kind of doing more of the site management things, I was like, well, I don't really love this, data reviews and just kind of all of the different tasks that come along with it. So it was a personal journey of kind of identifying, right, what I enjoyed out of my career and then honing in on that. So once I started to gain that clarity, I was like, okay, how can I transition to a more purely TMF based role? And so that's when I found my current company and they had a business need to get it up and running. And I was like, yes, this is it. And so I was lucky enough to get hired and they took me along on board and trusted me, right, with kind of building out everything, which was huge.
So you were a part of that vendor selection for the eTMF system.
Correct. Yep.
And you implemented it right from day one.
So we had the request for proposals, right? So we were looking at different vendors, seeing, right, which one would be the best fit, right? There's a lot of considerations to take into place. And so I think it took a few months, 1 to 3 months, we'll say, after I joined to make that selection and then start implementing.
So were you in charge of the systems aspect as well as the daily operations of the TMF, or were those two separate roles?
It is everything. Yes, it was just me. So I did implement the system and then all of the SOPs, making sure the processes were in place. There's multiple studies. You typically have clinical trial assistants help with the TMF as well as CRAs and all the other functional groups as well, right? Everyone has a helping hand in uploading their documents, getting them into the system. So I would say it was the spearhead, the point person, but everyone contributes.
You were the subject matter expert.
Yes, yes.
So tell us a little bit, like, what does a day in the life of an associate director of TMF sort of look like? What are your key responsibilities that keep you on your toes?
Yeah, of course. So I will say it's definitely changed over time. Currently, I am a one-man army. It is a lot of different hats. I would say at this moment in time, a lot of my work is focused on the operational activities. So the day-to-day looks like I have documents to QC, right? I have them in my TMF system. I actually love QCing, so I don't mind one bit. We have Monday reports, so I follow up with all the studies, making sure documents are in the approved state, right? We look at documents that are in progress or QC rejected, open quality issues, because I learned very early on, you have to be proactive. You do not want to end the study and you have hundreds or thousands of rejected documents. There's just no way to make sure to get those corrections in a timely fashion. So lots of proactive tasks. Yeah, those Monday reports are huge for us, both internally and externally following up. I also do TMF monthly health summaries. So the beginning of the month, looking at different trends, making sure we're capturing, okay, what issues are the top QIs this month? Is it metadata? Is there a certain form that's, having issues? Right now, we're at the end of Q2. So we have our TMF quarterly health meetings, which I love to do actually. It's just so crazy what you can find from metrics, right? You're like, it's so eye-opening. And there's the easy ones like how many documents uploaded per month versus, right, your quality issues, pre-approval, post-approval, and document deletion. So the list goes on and on. Very much so operational. But at the same time, right, I love to focus on process improvements. So I do meet with my systems counterpart actually every week, and we talk about different configurations. Can we make this user experience better, right? How can we make it less clicks, right? Because when you're in the system a lot, even one click can really, really help.
Yes.
The little things matter.
It does. It does. It's amazing how many clicks it can take just to get to like a 1572. So we can reduce that. You could save a lot of time.
So yeah, lots of just little system improvements. And of course, joining different calls, whether that be, calls with the CRO, our internal clinical operations, as well as different kind of governance calls as needed, right? For escalations. It's a whole lot of little things here and there. There are a lot of projects I would love to work on, like having a knowledge center, our own little TMF website internally where people can go and it's your one-stop shop for all of your TMF questions. So kind of always thinking about like the oversight and just how to communicate the TMF better to everyone while kind of balancing, right, with the day-to-day operations.
Do you have to be like the barrier of bad news sometimes, talking to the sponsor or saying, well, this is why we're not where we should be? Or is that like a project manager or the CTM role's responsibility?
I would say it's a little bit of both, but I definitely am the bearer of bad news sometimes, which stings because you never want to do that. But it kind of happens typically right in the form of metrics. We do breakdowns by like department or by the CRO versus sponsor. So you could kind of tell and like cross compare. And I don't want to say it's a little bit of competition, but like you can see, right, okay, which functional groups are doing good. And that almost motivates others to want to do better because they're like, oh, like I see they're doing 90%. We got to get up there too. So that's definitely one way to be the bearer of bad news is just presenting simply metrics cross-functionally, but also for governance calls. So say the sponsor, we have to meet with the CRO every quarter or so, check in, right, on how things are going. So if there are issues, right, at that point, escalate like, hey, we're seeing these trends of quality issues, or perhaps this forum needs to be revisited to make it better, to mitigate what we're seeing. So lots of different forums, but I think it's also the way that you speak about the bad news, right? It's if you put it in a positive light to say, okay, this is the problem, but like here are the steps and here's what we can do to fix it, then it's not so bad, quote unquote.
Right. You're not just presenting the problem, but you have a plan and this is how you're going to execute it.
Yes, exactly.
That definitely helps ease the mind or the worry of the issues that arise.
Yeah.
So you definitely have to be proactive in this role and forward thinking. Anything else?
Communication is huge too, right? Being in the TMF, I think when I first started, I didn't realize how cross-functional it was, right? Because you're typically in clinical operations or maybe in a quality department, right? And you're like, oh, this is my focus, chasing ClinOps, right? Getting all the documents. But as we know, there's 11 zones, right? You have statistics, data management, you have labs. And so it is just so critical to be able to communicate right with everyone to get those documents in.
Yeah, where's that data management plan?
Lots of chasing. I think if you effectively communicate the expectations, right? So it's like, okay, one of the activities I did early on was sitting down with every functional group, going through their SharePoint, going through their SOPs. Okay, what forms do you guys have? Is it critical to be filed in the TMF? And so from that, we kind of identified, like, this is required, let's get it in, or like, maybe this shouldn't be filed, let's not file this. So I think having those clear expectations early on kind of really helps downstream.
Yes, definitely. That forward thinking, being proactive, and just staying ahead of the game for sure. What do you believe are the essential skills and attributes that sort of set apart a successful associate director of TMF from the rest?
Yeah, so I don't know if this is a skill, but I would say the answer would be just asking questions, right? So if you have the ability to see something and you're like, wait, why? Or wait, how? Who? And so it kind of allows you to get a deeper understanding of the process and maybe identify different pitfalls or obstacles. I think the biggest example I can think of would be relevant communications. We all know those are tricky. The whole industry struggles with it. And so I was like, okay, this is my problem, right? Relevant communications aren't getting in. So what can we do? So I made an SOP and I also made this supplemental form or kind of checklist to help people think through what is a relevant communication. So it kind of assesses the topic, right? So is it applicable to the clinical trial? And then what is the criticality, right? Is it a key decision? It's more of a thought guidance so that users can look at it, think about it, and then assess if they want to get that relevant communication in. So that's step one, right? Is making sure we know what a relevant communication is. But then the second question was, okay, well, how do we get relevant communications in? Some companies have document inboxes. And I think the hardest part is that manual upload process. I worked with my TMF counterpart with the system, and I was like, they actually have an automatic forwarding functionality. So we were able to create, right, if you send to this email, it's going to automatically forward to the system. So now that takes out this huge step, right, of manually uploading. And it's in the system. Someone just has to go in, triage it, right, classify. And what we found, right, is that has helped so much, right, because that manual process is now gone. So yeah, I think if you're able to just question things, right, and just ask those questions, it helps guide you and problem solving, right? Getting feedback from others. So I like to get the opinions of the users, right? You're uploading into the TMF. What issues are you running into, right? Like what is just not working for you? By getting that feedback, then you're able to help assess and propose different solutions. And I think the biggest thing too is that although we may implement a solution, things change, right? Business processes change, things might not work. So being flexible to always adapting as needed.
The relevant communications one is such a good example because we always have two types of people in the industry. The ones that are like, less is more, and they don't have all the pieces there that need to be there. And so I love that tool that you were talking about that really walks you through the thought process of how to make a decision.
Yeah, and it's tricky. I mean, it is so subjective because what, for example, you might think is a relevant communication, I might be like, I don't think so, right? So it's so subjective, but at least it gets us right a step closer to being more complete and having hopefully more of those relevant communications in the TMF.
Yes, definitely. And even the feedback example is good too, because a lot of times we're giving feedback to the wrong people. They're sort of like our friends at work, we're just venting, but they may not necessarily be the decision makers or on the daily of like, who can make this change? And so asking for that feedback. And a lot of times, if you ask, people will give it.
Yeah.
Very willingly. Be like, I hate this system, or I love this system. This feature works great. Like, best decision ever.
Yes. Oh, and surveys. I think surveys are a good way to get feedback too, especially if it's anonymous, right? No names attached, just like, tell me what you think, right? Like that. I just thought of that right now. It's like, that is something I need to do.
Yeah, but they can't be long. Like, we don't have time for a 15-minute survey. It's got to be short.
2 minutes, 3 minutes.
Exactly. Yeah. Because if it takes too long, you're not going to get the feedback.
It's very true. Yeah. Time is precious. So precious.
So every role has its challenges. What are the biggest obstacles you face in keeping your TMF sort of inspection ready, and how do you tackle them?
Yeah, so I think for me personally, completeness is always the biggest challenge. Systems use different ways of capturing completeness. So you could have, placeholders, you could have expected document lists, and it really just varies. But at the end of the day, these studies move so fast and you're kind of always playing catch up. So it's important to have good processes in place to check in with the study team. So like your EDL reviews, is it going to be time-based? Will you do it every quarter, every 6 months? Or will it be milestone based? Because certain systems have milestones. Personally, I do like time based just to make sure we're meeting on a particular cadence, meeting with all the cross-functional teams. I do actually sit down with all of them personally, and we go through the EDL because sometimes when you send it out, there might be misunderstandings, right? With like what due dates to input or maybe what should be filed here. So if you're there to help guide the teams, I find that that has been very helpful. In addition to completeness, right? We're using the system as the basis. So you want to make sure that you understand the system and that it's working for you. And so what I found a lot of times is that they're not very accurate. So for example, a certain artifact, right, is delegated a department and you're like, oh, this is who I'm supposed to chase. But that's not always the case, right? You could have multiple departments filing into an artifact. For example, right now I'm thinking of external data transfers, right? You can have external data transfer specifications coming from labs. You could have multiple of them. So it's unfair to say that just because it's in zone 10. So what I'm actually really excited about currently is I'm working with my system vendor lead to update the EDLs, and how this is going to look like is the department has to stay because from a system perspective, right, it has to be there. But we're adding 2 additional kind of metadata points, which is responsible for filing as well as organization. So this will tell me very accurately, right, who I have to chase. So and they could also tell me the correct expected documents, right? EDLs have, I think, haunted me since day one. I think we talk a lot about them at conferences, there's different webinars, but I never felt like they were accurate. So like my biggest mission is like, I need this to be accurate. I want them to pull into dashboards so that when someone asks me, like for this department or for this person, right, like what are we delinquent in, right? What do we need to file? And I could pull that super quickly. It's been created, it's in validation. So I'm running U18 now and I'm super excited. Yes. I'm thinking it'll be launched to production in August. So we'll see how it goes. And it's just so critical because I'm thinking Zone 9 is all vendor third party related. So how can you say that clinical operations is responsible for all of this? It really has to be broken down by your functional group, right? DM owns EDC, lab owns 10 different labs. And so if you're able to make that EDL specific, I have lab A, here's all my expected documents. I have lab B, or here's my CRO. This is what we delegated to them. So I am super, super excited.
It really is a collaborative approach when it comes to filing in the TMF. A lot of people think, oh, it's just the TMF department. They're the ones that's responsible, but we have to get everybody together. It's like a team huddle of like, all right, what does your department need?
Yeah.
Are we going to be filing these documents? Do we need it for this study? Is it applicable? Is it not? Who's going to be filing it? Who's on first base?
See, there's so many questions and it's so complicated.
How do you decide like for studies, like which metrics you're going to track?
I think early on, right, as part of the SOPs and everything, of course, you have, your completeness, your quality, your timeliness. Those are the three big KPIs. But during the TMF health meetings, I really like to deep dive into all of them. So I would say completeness is pretty straightforward. What is not started? What is in progress? So nothing too, no further kind of ironing out of those metrics. Regarding quality, right? Looking at open quality issues, closed ones, pre-approval versus post-approval, different error rates for periodic review cycles. So all of that goes into quality. And then timeliness, I think actually can be broken up into, I think I have like 5 or 6. So you have your contemporaneous document uploading, right? So did that document get into the TMF in 30 days or less or whatever your company specifies? Then you have your QC workflow. So then you also have QI resolution. How long did it take you to resolve your quality issues? Then you have your periodic review workflow. So there's just so many different metrics that you could look at. And I think they tell you so much as well. You could say, this is where we're struggling, right? We're not filing in a contemporaneous manner, or, oh gosh, our QC timeline is way above. What's happening? Is it a resource issue? Do we need to get another person? So it just it's very eye-opening, I think. I love metrics.
I think you have to in this role.
Yeah.
We really are data analyzers when it comes to these metrics. Yeah. And if you don't love it, then you got to get out fast.
Yeah. And I think too, another one is not only do you look at the metrics right at a given time point, but I love trends. So because I do the quarterly TMF health meetings, right, I typically have charts that it's like, okay, like Q1 2023, now we're in Q2 2024. And you would kind of see, right, like these trend lines going up and down. And you're like, oh, like study start, right, like tons of documents being uploaded. Then, okay, maintenance, right, like a little less. So it tells you the story as well with what's happening with filing.
So when you're analyzing these trends and the metrics, at what point are you thinking in your brain, okay, we need to escalate this?
If the metrics are looking poorly, if things are above the specified threshold, we have targets, we have goals, how many days. As soon as it goes above that threshold, that's my red flag of, okay, I need to go back, assess what's happening, whether that's internally, again, functional group, or perhaps externally with our CRO. So that's definitely where I start to dig deeper.
So tell me, how do you stay ahead of the game in the TMF operations? Like what recent initiatives or breakthroughs have you've led that you're particularly proud of?
Yeah, so I think in terms of staying on top of all things TMF is I'm a huge LinkedIn person. I follow all the TMF things. I follow you. So
Thank you.
I love reading all of these articles. There's so many resources that show the newest guidances, right? Regulatory requirements. And so it's really critical to kind of continue looking at those because the industry is always changing. I think the conferences are also a huge way to stay on top of things. I mean, I remember at last year's conferences, we were already talking about AI, right? How like AI and bots and things can help different workflows and what the future looks like. So it's just really exciting. And then the different regulations, right? There were different sessions for that as well. So I think conferences is another great way to get the most current information.
Speaking of conferences, you presented at CDISC last year. So let's talk a little bit like how did you prepare for that to ensure that your presentation was like clear, engaging, and impactful?
So, oh my gosh, it was my first time presenting and it was absolutely terrifying. So I was lucky enough though. I presented with my old boss because we kind of were playing with the idea like, I want to present, but maybe I'm not quite there yet. Let's do something together, right? And so we submitted our abstracts and one of them got selected. So we presented in Baltimore. And so really, before the conference, we had to put together the slides. So, we had meetings, we collaborated on the slides, we did some dry runs. And then for me, because it was my first time, I did a lot of dry runs, running through the slides, making sure I knew the main points that I wanted to touch on. But then, of course, the day comes and you get up there and you're just like the nervous jitters, right? And oh my gosh, the microphone didn't work. So they
Oh,
usually,
come on.
yeah,
Really?
I know. They do the little clip on, right? And it
Yeah.
wasn't working. They gave me like the handheld. So I had to hold the microphone. So of course, right, you're kind of thrown off, but you just have to like, take a deep breath. It's going to be okay. And I think what really helped me as well calm my nerves was reframing my mindset. So, I'm not presenting to people, right? I am training them or I'm trying to teach them something and share my knowledge. So I think with that perspective, it allowed me to kind of like get back into like my natural state of like, I love training, right? I love teaching others. I think in terms of our presentation as well, the way we formatted it was more of a tool and like a checklist in a way, so that if someone wanted to print out the slides, they could use it as a guide and take it back to their own company and adapt as needed. So that's really how we wanted to make the presentation impactful, to make it a tool that the TMFers could take away and use.
I love how you had to change your mindset, get into character almost, and be like, I'm the trainer. I'm just sharing knowledge with other
Yeah.
people in the TMF space. For those who are aspiring to reach the level you're at, like what advice would you give them? Like what should they focus on to achieve a role like yours?
I guess to start off with, it really starts with a strong foundation, right? So learning all things TMF, being super familiar with your TMF index, being familiar with management plans, right? Just really all things TMF. And then once you have that foundation, that's when you kind of the ability to start questioning things or maybe adapting things, right, for your business kind of, kicks into play. It's like, have this foundation. Now, how can we adapt it? And in terms of getting to the next level, it's a lot of communications with your bosses, right? Being like, I'm in this role. This is what I want to be in a few years, right? How do I get there? And I think for every company, it does look so different because there's small companies. You have 1 or 2 man teams versus a 50,000 person company, right? It's very different. But I think effectively communicating, like, this is my desire, right? I really want to do this, and getting that clear feedback of the steps that you need to take. So again, for myself, I was in the TMF manager role. I had built the TMF, I did all the SOPs, and I was like, how do I, get to the next level? How do I get to the next step? That was the pivotal moment where it's like, okay, now, right, you're building a team. Now you have to, right, communicate your, expectations. So,
and that's very different too than doing your day-to-day operations of just QCing and then managing a team. Because some people are one or the other. They're like, I don't want to manage people. Like, I love the TMF,
yeah.
but I don't want to be responsible for the people working in the TMF.
Yes. So yeah, managing a team is definitely one component. And I think really accountability and responsibility, right? Because I think the director level, you are that point person, right? Everything falls to you. So you have to be ready for that. If things go wrong, people are going to come to you for questions, and you have to know exactly what is happening or how to mitigate. So I would say it's a lot of responsibility. You have to be comfortable in taking on that next step. And it's a lot of work. It's a lot of hours. It's a lot of everything. But if you like what you do, then it doesn't feel like that. So,
So I have two questions that I like to ask everybody at the end of the show. And the first one is, what's the best career advice that you've ever received, and who's it been by? And it doesn't have to be in clinical research. It can be any job.
yeah. So I don't know where I heard this phrase. If you like what you do, you'll never work a day in your life. And so I really feel that, before, when I was doing biotech, it kind of just like, it was a job, right? And then vet school too, right? Like, it wasn't for me. I was like, gosh, I'm not happy, right? I'm not fulfilled, right? There's something missing. And then when I fell into the TMF and then moved back to ClinOps, I was like, gosh, I love the TMF, right? Like, I found my niche, right? This is what makes me happy. And I mean, even on weekends too, right? You're just like constantly looking at like articles or constantly looking at videos. And it's like, gosh, if I'm like doing things in the evening or on the weekend, that must mean I really, really like what I do. So
Get out of my head. You sound like me.
But it's true.
Yeah, that's literally the only thing you can think about.
I love it. Of course, there's tasks that are tedious and tasks that you don't want to do. But overall, I love this space. And then also just zooming out and looking at the industry that we're in, right? We're in clinical trials. We're trying to discover drugs. We're trying to help others. So I think zooming out and also having that perspective makes it feel like what we do is impactful. So I also really love that.
How do you tell people you work in the TMF who are not in clinical research?
Oh my gosh. It's so funny because my parents have no idea what I do.
Right.
So the way that I like to describe it is I tell people that I am a librarian for clinical trials. I manage documents, right? I make sure that they are filed where they're supposed to be, that they're correct. And then all the other processes, kind of allude to, but really I think that key phrase of I am a librarian for clinical trials, just like it clicks, they get it. They're like, TMF, oh, documents, got it.
Yep, because I noticed, and you probably have too, if you start getting like TMF nerdy on them, you lose them. You can just see it in the face and you're like, I'm a librarian.
I know. Yes. And you almost have to pull back too, because I've realized, right, your audience is so important. So who are you talking to? Are they a TMF expert? Sometimes senior leadership. And like, you have to kind of use different terms to just make it easy to understand. Oh, another one I just thought of was the Dewey Decimal System. So I also use that because artifacts are basically exactly the same thing, right? We have our numbering schema, Dewey Decimal System. It's exactly the same thing. So
what's your favorite TMF document and why?
Oh my gosh, I love this. So I actually have two. So my favorite document is the 1572. And the reason why is because I think it's just such a great form, right? It's very clear. All of the sections have places where you type, right? It's very clearly outlined. You have section 1, section 2, IRB, sub-investigators, labs. So it really is that first document to start telling the story of your site. Who is your PI? Who's assisting? And then subsequent to that, the IP site release form, green light letter, because again, it's the beginning of a story. It tells you which protocol the site started on, which IB, ICF, and that's the starting point. And then from then on, you kind of know like which documents are expected afterwards. So it's really the storytelling aspect of the 1572 and IP site release form. Yeah.
Oh, that's so funny. It makes perfect sense, though, why you would say that. Mm-hmm. Well, Annette, this has been so much fun talking about the trial master file. I literally could talk to you all day about
I
this
know.
because we have like the same personality.
I love it. I could go on and on too.
All right. Well, thank you so much for coming on the TMF Daily Podcast.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Nicole. It was such a pleasure.